Join us by the fireside for our evening tales of true life's strange experiences with things that lie beyond the veil of the known and into the misty depths of the mysterious and unknown. The Grinning Specter. My story happened over the course of just over 3 years. I was about to turn 14, and my dad had decided to move us and my brother in with a woman who he had been seeing for the past year or so, and who would eventually become our stepmom. She wasn't a very nice person. So, anyway, the house that we all moved into was kind of a strange house. I'm not quite sure how old this house was, but the most of the houses around there were actually from the 1800s. So the owner claimed that this was built in the 1970s, but like I said, most of them were from the 1800s, so I don't know if this person was right or not. Anyway, regardless, the house just had this kind of weird layout. The upstairs bedrooms seemed more like kind of a converted attic than bedrooms. They had kind of these sloped ceilings, that attics usually have, and I would always hit my head on the ceiling because I was pretty tall. I was am 6 feet tall, and I've been that tall ever since I was actually 14 years old. So my room didn't have a door. The staircase just sort of came directly into the room. So literally, the first day that we moved into this house, we started experiencing weird stuff. The first day we were there, I tried to go to bed and it was around 10 p.m. after spending all day just moving stuff into the house. My bed was just laying on the floor directly across the room from where the stairs are. I was laying there for maybe about 10 minutes when I started hearing what sounded like footsteps coming up the stairs. My dad has quite bad insomnia, so I wasn't really too concerned about, hearing the footsteps, and I thought maybe it's just him and he can't sleep, and he's coming to check on me and my brother. But when the footsteps kind of reached the top of the stairs, just around the corner from my vision, they just stopped, and then they turned around. And that's when I became aware that the footsteps were too heavy to be Dad because it sounded like someone who was wearing boots. And there's no reason why Dad would be wearing boots if he was just coming from his bed, just to check up on us. So these footsteps continued for about 15 minutes. So they would just keep going up and down the stairs over and over. And then they finally got back to the top and just stopped completely. And needless to say, that's at the point where I started to feel really scared, and I just didn't sleep all night. When I asked my dad about this, he told me that he had been exhausted and just fell asleep pretty quickly. My stepmom and brother had been asleep too. These footsteps continued every night for weeks until then they just suddenly stopped for some inexplicable reason. I was hardly getting any sleep at this point because I was just so scared because, every time these footsteps would end this kind of up and down and they would just end right outside my room. And it was like someone was just standing there waiting to come in. I mean, I just couldn't sleep through that. I was pretty relieved when they did, however, finally stop. And they were quickly replaced, though, by something worse. So about a week after these footsteps stopped, I started noticing that the light in the stairwell would flicker all night long. Normally, I would think that there was, an issue with the wiring or the socket, but we tried to fix it and nothing worked. On top of that, the flickering wasn't the right color. I don't know if color is the right word, but the light in the stairwell normally cast out the average kind of yellowish light, the old bulbs always had, and the flickering was always bright white. This flickering continued the rest of the time I was in that house almost every night, and there was something about it that always filled me with this sense of dread. Eventually, I got so bothered by this that I just moved my bed in a way that I could no longer see this flickering light at night. But that's when the nightmares started to come. I started having these weird nightmares where I would be laying in bed and I would be cowering under the covers. The TV in my room would be nothing but this loud static. And then there would be this tall shadow of a man in a top hat in the corner of the room. This man would be completely obscured except for the whites of his eyes and his blindingly white teeth. All he would do was to just stand there and watch me, and he never moved, but he was always grinning. I continued to have this dream a few times a week for a couple of years until I was over 16 years old when it finally stopped. The dream was gone for about a year until the worst night of my life happened when I was around 17. I had kind of gotten used to not having the dream, and as I had been avoiding this flickering light for years at this point, I had gotten pretty comfortable again. Then the dream came back suddenly, only it was much, much worse. The dream now started off as usual, except I wasn't initially cowering. I was laying on my side facing the TV, which was again just this really loud static. I rolled over onto my back to find the shadow man literally inches from my face, still grinning at me. This was so shocking and terrifying, and I just would wake up screaming. Only it wasn't over at that point. As I woke up, I saw what appeared to be a tall shadow leaving my room and heading down the stairs. Now, I should mention that this stairwell makes a 180-degree turn halfway up, and at this landing, there's also a window. As I was screaming, I obviously woke the entire house. My younger brother came running out of his room, asking what was going on, and I could hear my dad running down the hall at the bottom of the stairs. When my dad came up to my room, I explained what happened. That's when he told me that the window in the stairwell that was always locked was wide open in the middle of the night, and none of us had opened it. I have plenty more stories from this house of, just weird stuff that happened, but that really was just the most horrifying, to just wake up and see that face right there grinning at you. I can't even describe how horrifying it was and the shock I felt. I'm sure if I'd had a weak heart or something, if I was older and I had a weak heart, I probably would have just got a heart attack from that. So anyway, there's constantly really weird stuff going on in that house, from just general feelings of dread to seeing shadow people to having some of the most horrible nightmares you'll ever have. And we've seen writing and handprints on mirrors. We've heard demonic growls coming from the darkness and even had things grab at us in the dark. It's honestly pretty intense. And I don't like being in that house alone if I can avoid it. So anyway, that's it for now. And I'm hoping that at some point, this will stop, or we will just be able to get out of there and never go back. The birdcage. My own experience with creepy things was when I was about 9 years old. Myself and some friends, we used to play around the neighborhood exploring places. We almost used to always choose places which, were not crowded and were kind of empty, without telling our parents. There was an old house, and I kind of had my eyes on it. This place was abandoned and very old. I'm not sure what happened to the guys there, but it was quite secluded and facing the woods. I used to get very excited thinking about finding some nice, treasure in the house, in an old house. And I'd imagine myself finding this magic lamp with maybe a genie or something really kind of special. I discussed with my group of adventurers, and we decided to go there on a Sunday afternoon. I was so excited, and I packed up my flashlight and a few other little tools and things that were sure to come in handy for the adventure. And it included a walkie-talkie. There were five of us, and we went near the backside and we crawled beneath the fence to reach the backyard. Now, this was a kind of a creepy backyard. You couldn't even hear leaves rustling, and there was an old broken children's swing that sort of creeped us out. Anyway, myself and my friend Tracy, we made fun of, our other friend who was creeped out by the old swing. And then we went on and we broke into the house. The door was actually already broken and it just needed a bit of a push to open it. So we went in, and the first thing that really hit us was this really horrible smell. It was like the worst thing we'd ever smelled. It was the smell of something that had died. I thought maybe some animal had gotten in and died somewhere inside there, but we couldn't actually find anything. Anyway, we covered our noses and we just sort of explored the inside. To my disappointment, I couldn't really find much of interest inside except cobwebs and birds and while exploring, this smell just seemed to be getting stronger. So our friend, Tom, almost threw up because of the smell. I realized that the house had an attic too, so we opened a hatch and we went in. It felt like death. It's hard to explain, but it was just like going into a grave or something. I just used my flashlight to find my way around and I saw a table and it had this rusted bird cage in there. And I had never seen a bird cage like that. Without thinking, I just sort of picked it up and I realized that the cage wasn't empty. So my friend Tracy and the other guy got really freaked out by it. And so I decided to take it back and try to open it. I was really certain that there was treasure in there for some reason, or at least some kind of clue. We went out, and then my other friends, Ben and Chris, complained about us smelling like rotten eggs. I showed them the cage and told them about the treasure inside. At this point, Tracy wants to go home as she just started feeling sick. I promised her it wouldn't take long and we'd rush back to my house, to my dad's garage. We picked up a wrench and we started trying to open this little gate to the birdcage. And to our surprise, it actually didn't open. It was way too strong for being, this old rusty thing, but it just wouldn't open. After almost an hour of trying, we just gave up and went back. I went back home and Mom asked me where I was and I told her we were playing in the park. She came close to me and started retching. She told me, "Addie, you smell like rotten eggs." That just really creeped me out, and I went to take a bath and clean myself. So I went to sleep that night, and I woke up after a while to some commotion. I went out and saw Tracy's parents. Apparently, she had fainted and couldn't breathe properly and was wheezing so much. I told her parents about our adventure. My dad looked in the garage and found our birdcage. I'm not sure what he did with it, but I was grounded and got very sad. A few days later, I came to know that Stacy has been diagnosed with asthma. Now, I had known her a couple of years and she was pretty healthy. I went to meet her and what she told me haunts me to this day. She said, "He likes choking me." When I asked her what does she mean by he, she told me the man standing there and pointed towards an empty corner. Needless to say, I was so freaked out. And I just got out of there. Her parents moved from there soon, and I don't know how she is now. Needless to say, I was creeped the hell out, and I just got out of there. Her parents moved from there soon after that, and I don't know how she is. I haven't kept in touch. It's like something in me is just too scared to. I don't know. Maybe I'm just afraid that this thing will come after me, but I just haven't even tried to look for her much. And even if I knew where she was, I don't think I'd want to talk to her for a while. I need to get over the trauma of this experience first. The drowned spirit. I'm 17 years old. This was a fairly recent experience I have. I have had quite a few other experiences before, but this was like probably the most terrifying. Anyway, that day I had some friends come over and we were just kind of hanging out around the fire in our backyard. Only one of my friends out of the four knew of my experiences, so we'd been kind of recording them since, like I was 9 years old. So I was sitting next to David with our backs to the theater room's window when I suddenly felt the urge to look behind me as if something was there. The weirdest thing was that we were talking about David's Ouija board experiences with a spirit that had drowned. I didn't let anyone say its name during this experience. I don't know why, but I just felt that saying its name might call it to us. So I looked twice, and then I could see it. There was a girl. Her hands were flat against the glass, and her hair was black, and it looked like it was almost kind of slicked back, sort of maybe wet or something. The eyes were really strange. I can't even describe them. My friend, Maggie, knew about me feeling something behind me as I had whispered it to her as the boys were talking. About 15 minutes later, David went suddenly quiet after looking at the window. So I asked him what was wrong, and he said that he just felt something in the room at the window. Now, up until now, I had been told that they were all just hallucinations, maybe he was making it up to have some fun. Even with that in mind, I froze. Can you see it? He could not. Good. I described to them what it looked like, but I left out the most horrific detail because I didn't know how to talk about it. It was just so horrible. And that was its smile. I can still see it in my mind. So around midnight, Matthew and Harry were going on about how badly they wanted to see it. I mean, I understand where they're coming from. Who wouldn't, right? But I then come to learn that David could also see it now, and I now have the clarity that it was all real. Because he explained the details of what he saw, and he even told me about the smile. The same one I refused to talk about because it was just so horribly wrong. This smile just stretched up close to its ears. It was like just so inexplicably awful. So anyway, our looks of horror were proof enough that it was no joke. And I learnt that David's family is very eccentric, which I had no idea about until that night. This wasn't even the worst part, though. About 10 minutes after that, we tried to steer the conversation elsewhere, and I froze. I have never felt like this before in my life. Suddenly, tears just seemed to prick my eyes, but never spilled, as I stared blankly into the space where no one sat. I can't even begin to explain the fear I felt in that moment. It just came over me suddenly. It was so awful. My friend actually told me later that I, in that moment, had become almost lifeless. It was as if I was trying to curl in on myself. But I don't remember any of that. I remember just asking David if this thing was at the window. And I was swearing in a panic as he struggled to understand me, because the fear just went through me. It was so awful, so paralyzing. It was dead silent now, and they were concerned, especially when David started to stress, since it was no longer in that room, asking me if it was behind Maggie, who was next to me. I'm surprised I didn't cry, as all I could do was just say yes, even though it was behind me rather than Maggie. Then it seemed to walk through me. I felt my energy drain out of me, but it was almost relieving as all those emotions of terror suddenly left and I felt fine. Aside from the shock, I was snapped back into reality, wiping my eyes as I tried to get rid of the tears that still never fell. We experienced three other instances that night, but they could never compare to that thing and that experience. At least now I do have another person to be, my proof of what happened, if you like, that it was real. I still have not told my parents, and I don't think I ever will, to be honest. My dad used to be an apprentice psychic. I don't know what led him to stop, but I need people I can relate to because it can be so terrifying with several more instances prior in this very house. I have to say, however, that we are going to be moving, although my parents are not. So I'm really looking forward to that because I honestly don't want to keep having these experiences, and that thing just terrified me. The Strangler. I had this experience where I was really feeling like I was being watched ever since I was a child, and especially when I was alone. And then one day it just stopped. I thought that whatever was watching me was now gone. Until one day my sister, who's always been sensitive to entities and spirits and things, said that there was a big black shadow following her around the house. She was really frustrated with this thing and she just started to shout at it and she threatened it without just thinking much about it. And then the situation after that just actually got worse. And the shadow started to appear everywhere and every day. And she was terrified of being alone with it eventually. Now, my dad decided to put a knife at the door of our room. We shared it, so it wouldn't enter. And it worked for some time until one day my mom was in my room with the door closed and heard someone knocking on the door. She thought it was one of us and without thinking said that we could pass. As it turned out, nobody had knocked on the door that day, none of us. And so then one night I woke up because something threw the door of my room open and entered. I saw this shadow walking to my sister and putting its hands on her throat. She started to scream, and I didn't know what to do. I couldn't move from the fear of it. So I did the only thing that I knew that could help, and it was the only thing I could do. I prayed. I prayed to make that thing, whatever it was, let go of my sister and leave her alone. I prayed so it would go away. For some reason, to my relief, it worked, and this black thing just disappeared. When I woke up the next day, the first thing that went to my mind was that it could all have been a terrible nightmare, maybe. But then I saw the door slightly open, and I knew that it wasn't. This had really happened. The lions. This was kind of a really strange story that still gives me chills and goosebumps. Um, and anyway, it happened when I was a child. I absolutely hate thunderstorms. I was really, really scared to death of them. And I would beg to sleep with my mom and dad whenever they happened. Sometimes I didn't want to wake them up, so I would just tiptoe into their room and I would sleep on the floor on my mom's side of the bed. And I felt safe knowing that she was right there with me. Now, my parents' room was directly across a long hallway from my room, so it was just a long straight line past the bathroom to get there. One night, when I was maybe about 8 or 9, there was a really bad storm, and I was woken up by this thunder and immediately got out of bed and I decided I was going to sleep with mom and dad. And so I crept out of my room as usual when this happened, and I just tiptoed down the hallway. I probably got about 3 feet from my parents' door when I saw three very small apparitions in front of my parents' door. And this sounds nuts, but they were lion like creatures with sharp teeth and really kind of cloudy eyes. They were snarling at me and guarding my parents' doorway. And I felt such intense fear that if I tried getting past them, something terrible would happen to me. So I ran back to my room and I just stayed there and rode out the storm in my own bed. This happened a couple more times that same summer. I saw these little transparent creatures outside my parents' bedroom, and I never slept with them again. Eventually, when I got older, I completely forgot about that experience, and I never saw, these things as a teenager or an adult. And if I did recall it, I probably wrote it off as childhood imagination. But here's the part that still gives me the chills today. Years later, when I was in high school, we had a family barbecue, and all my aunts and cousins were over, and the little cousins were playing hide and seek. My little cousin Samantha, who was probably about 8 at the time, came running outside one day, crying hysterically, and we all asked her what was wrong. What she said almost made me throw up. She said that she was hiding in my parents' room and she got attacked by a little lion ghost. The adults all laughed, of course, and they told her to go and sit down and relax. But I just lost it. And I just went pale. And I just went for a walk because I started shaking. So to this day, I don't know what those things are and why they're even in my parents' room. I have no idea. But I just find it terrifying.